Welcome to the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. I'm Christian of Standing Stones Healing, founder of the Reiki Business Collective and creator of the Build Your Reiki Business program, sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business. Greetings, welcome, and thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. I'm Christian of Standing Stones Healing, so honored and excited to have you here. So thank you so very much for tuning in this week for another episode. This week's episode is about in-person Reiki. In-person Reiki for your Reiki business. But first, you are cordially invited to the Reiki Business Summit happening this November 22nd to the 25th, 4 days full of speakers, networking, discussions. It is an event you will not want to miss, and indeed you are invited. Learn more at standingstoneshealing.com/summit. The link is down below. Thank you. In-person Reiki is, of course, what we typically think of when we think of a Reiki session, and in-person Reiki is what many Reiki practitioners practice, if not most practitioners practice in-person Reiki. Now, of course, last week's episode was about distance Reiki, so you can tune in on that to get my thoughts on distance Reiki. But some things that I would like to share with you about in-person Reiki might actually surprise you. First, I want to reveal that I actually in some ways believe that in-person Reiki is more effective than distance Reiki. Now, hold on one second and let me explain. As someone who has done lots and lots of distance Reiki sessions over the years, indeed, I have done more distance Reiki sessions than I have in-person sessions. I believe that in-person Reiki can be more effective, not because of Reiki. So when we offer a session, whether that's distance or in person, Reiki is still doing its Reiki thing. And so Reiki doesn't care if the session is in person or distance. Reiki, when I say Reiki, I mean the energy Reiki. Doesn't care. It's all the same. And so whether it's in person or distance, I believe that the effectiveness of the session is not about whether or not Reiki is quote unquote stronger in person or at a distance. Reiki is just as powerful yesterday as it will be tomorrow, as it is in person, as it is with distance. And so the effectiveness of a session is not about Reiki itself. It's about our perception of the session. And I believe that when we have an in-person session, clients, and maybe even practitioners too, depending upon the practitioner, can believe that in-person is more powerful than distance. So let me explain a little bit further. When we schedule an in-person session, there are a lot of steps that are involved. So let's say I'm the client and I am scheduling an in-person session. Of course, always there is the barrier, quote unquote, barrier of scheduling a session, taking the time to remember to schedule, going through the process of scheduling. Depending upon the practitioner's scheduling process, this might be easier or harder, but always scheduling an appointment takes some steps and is a barrier to getting in the door to a session. So I think it's important for us as practitioners to remember that first and foremost, even when someone wants to come see us, there are a lot of barriers that they face to scheduling to get in to come and see us. And they don't even have to do with the client's mental state so much as even just the barrier of, oh, I forgot. Oh, I've got a lot going on. Oh, what's that website again? And so the easier we can make it for clients, the better. But that's just getting over the hurdle of scheduling. Then for an in-person session, the client has to get in the car. Now, this is, of course, if they are coming to us. If you have a mobile session, there's a bit less of a barrier there in terms of the client's transportation. If you are going to the client, there's an added level of convenience for the client and an added level of inconvenience for you as the practitioner. I speak of this from personal experience. But when someone has an in-person session, if they are traveling to the office, there's another layer of a challenge, another hurdle for them to overcome. We also have to remember that not just getting in the car or taking transit and getting there, they also have to get dressed. So maybe they have to change their clothes, brush their hair, brush their teeth, look presentable to show up to the appointment, and then be in that space for an hour or however long your session might last. And so because of the added effort that it takes to get themselves to an in-person session, I believe that oftentimes clients might view an in-person session as a greater commitment, and indeed on many levels it is. It's much simpler, much more involved than saying, okay, show up on your computer at this time and we'll meet, or even saying, okay, go lay down at 10 o'clock and that's when I'll start sending Reiki. Or even, well, do whatever you want whenever you want, but just know that I'll be sending you distance Reiki. And so all of those things are much more simple than going into an office, making that effort. Because of that, I think that in-person Reiki can be more effective depending upon the client and their mindset, and even indeed depending upon the practitioner. Because if the practitioner believes that an in-person session is more effective than a distance session, then they may very well put forth a greater effort in the in-person session than the distance session. And when I say effort, I don't mean in sending Reiki, because of course there's no effort on our part. I just mean in terms of showing up and being a professional and bringing their best selves. I talk about this importance of being a professional, including in a distance session, in last week's episode on distant Reiki. And so while it's not about the Reiki itself, I believe that an in-person session can be more effective simply because of the mindset of the client and viewing it perhaps even more like a health or wellness kind of appointment that they might travel to an office for. The second thing about in-person Reiki that I think it's important to note is that element of being in someone's physical space and with someone else physically. You know, I think that online offerings are very effective and very impactful, whether that's Reiki sessions, card reading, coaching, courses. We can indeed have very impactful experiences online. And for some people, being live in person just feels more normal, natural, and comfortable to them. And some clients, and indeed some practitioners, really want that in-person human connection that you can't get online or with distance Reiki. So things like, putting a hand on someone's shoulder when you are consoling them, or a hand on their hand, or offering a tissue if they are crying. Those are things that we cannot do online. We cannot do through the computer or the phone. And so because of that, many practitioners prefer in-person Reiki because of that human connection, and some clients do as well. Many clients want that connection. What's also great about in-person Reiki in terms of that connection is that we can reach people who don't have the accessibility of a computer, a phone, solid internet connection. It might be hard to believe, but there are plenty of places in the world that don't have stable internet. And so that means that not everyone who might want a Reiki session, including or especially in rural areas, are able to have a distance session and are able to access Reiki sessions online. And so it's, I think, very important for us to remember that in terms of accessibility, sometimes in person has greater accessibility than something that we might offer online. In terms of accessibility, I think one thing that is important for us to consider in our in-person Reiki practice is whether or not our space is accessible. And so are there stairs? Is there an elevator? What is the space like that someone needs to get to in order to get into a session? And so, if we have clients who have physical limitations with climbing stairs, for instance, do we have an office space that accommodates that? I think that can be really helpful and important, while at the same time recognizing that we can't always have the most ideal space for everyone. And there are certain things that in many ways are just simply out of our control. If we rent an office space where there are a couple of steps into the office or something like that, maybe that's the only place that we can find at our price point. And so while it's important for us to be keeping accessibility for our clients and potential clients in mind, it's not always possible to have the most accessible space that we might like to have. And of course, there are always limitations with any space, not just in terms of accessibility physically, but also in terms of the noise level and in terms of the layout of the space and all of those things. In an in-person space, there are, of course, multiple places that we can offer in-person Reiki. We think, first of all, of the typical office setting. Yes, that is one. We also can go to people's spaces ourselves. Yes, that is number two. We also can have people come to our home. Yes, indeed, that is number three. But we can also offer in-person Reiki in all kinds of places. Places like a park, for instance. I once had a client who lives in a major city, and she had someone who was interested in having a session with her. And she said to me, "But I don't have a space. I can't have this person over at my apartment. What can I do? I'm not renting a space. What can I do?" And I said, "You got lots of parks in your big city. Have you thought about maybe just meeting them at a park and offering them Reiki at a park?" And so we can do this. We can offer Reiki in all kinds of places. Reiki in the woods, for instance, is pretty cool. But we don't need to limit ourselves to a typical in-person office setting. At the same time, having our practice in person in an office setting, when it's in person, to have it in an office, can really help with having clients feel that they are going to a professional kind of appointment and meeting with a professional. So those are some things to consider. But can you offer in-person Reiki outside of an office? Absolutely you can. I have a whole article on it called Reiki Office Hacks that is part of the free Reiki Biz Kit. The link is down below, standingstoneshealing.com/Reiki Biz Kit, where you can get that free Reiki Office Hacks article for some more ideas for offering Reiki when it's in person and not in a standard office setting. In my Reiki business, my in-person sessions have largely been mobile sessions in which I travel to the client's space. And that space depends upon the client. Maybe their home, maybe their own office space, whatever it might be. But one thing that is very important for me in my in-person sessions is this idea of physical touch. And for me, as a Reiki practitioner, when I have an in-person client, I have a blanket policy that I do not touch the person. And of course, when we think of Reiki, we often talk about it as a quote unquote light touch kind of practice. But the truth is that we don't have to touch at all. And for me, as a man who has a largely female clientele, whether this is in person or distance, wherever it might be, the vast majority of my clients have been and are, and probably will continue to be, female identified. And so for me, it's very important for me to make clear at the beginning of each of my sessions that I hover my hands above their body and I do not practice physical touch in in-person Reiki. Yes, indeed, you can do that. You don't have to touch someone for in-person Reiki, and Reiki is still going to do its Reiki thing. It's no less effective. But I do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's very important to me to be respectful of boundaries, recognizing that the vast majority of my clients are female identified, recognizing that they may have some concerns or hesitations about having a session with me, and recognizing that I don't know all of their history, where they've been, what they've done, and how they might perceive or receive any kind of physical contact. And so for me, it's very important. I tell all of my clients, my new clients, at the beginning of the session that I practice hands-off Reiki, and that I hover my hands a couple of inches above their body, but that I will not be touching them throughout the session. I think it's very important for us. I think it's essential for us. No, I know it's essential for us to make sure that always we are getting client permission for touch. This means that if you are offering in-person Reiki, I strongly encourage you to always talk to the client before, at the start of the session, to make sure that they are clear on what Reiki is, how it works, where you may be placing your hands, and to get permission to place your hands anywhere on a client. For me personally, I'm a huggy kind of person. I like hugs, but it doesn't mean that I like to be touched. One place, for instance, that I do not like to be touched is my face. Like, don't touch my face. I am a very germ-aware kind of person, and I do not like other people touching my face. And so when I have an in-person Reiki session, I make that clear to the practitioner. Please don't touch my face. And so I believe it's very important for us to be mindful of the things that we don't know about people. Like, people wouldn't automatically assume when I come into a Reiki session that I don't want you touching my face. Don't put your Reiki hands on my face. And so you might not, probably wouldn't, how could you know that about me? And so I make it a habit to tell any practitioner that I meet with that, that's a hands-off area. Thank you very much. But our clients probably don't know to do that, because many of our clients probably don't know exactly what to expect in a Reiki session, especially newer clients. And so always we want to be walking them through the process, explaining exactly where we might put our hands, explaining exactly what they can expect. We always want our clients to know what to expect. Just period. No matter what kind of session we're offering, we want them to know what to expect, and we want to set expectations for them. And so explaining exactly where we might put our hands and how that might work is very important. But even more important than that is getting permission to put your hands on a client in the first place. Please don't assume that just because someone is coming in for a Reiki session, it means that they're okay with having hands placed on them. You don't know. Maybe they have never experienced Reiki before. Maybe for all of their other in-person sessions, they've never been touched, and they don't realize that that is something that can happen in a Reiki session. Of course, I explain to my clients that that's the way that it can and often does work, but that I personally like to keep my hands off. I also do this simply because I often feel better. I mean, I can sense, I should use the word sense rather than feel. I feel better when I don't touch you. I sense better when my hands are slightly off of the body and elevated rather than directly on the skin. And this is the case for me with my own self-practice as well. But I believe it's essential for us to always be getting permission and to not be placing our hands on people without permission. This is essential. Now, I also want to state that just because there's a particular area of the body where there's a hand placement doesn't mean you should automatically place your hands there. Sometimes we as Reiki practitioners can think, oh, well, it's okay for me to put my hands there because that's an official hand position. No, it's not. And so that means that just because there's an official hand position at the root chakra, for instance, doesn't mean that you should just go ahead and place your hands there. I once heard a horror story, it really was, about a woman who had a Reiki class with a husband and wife. They were the teachers, they were co-teaching. And they were teaching Reiki 1. She was all by herself. And when it came time for the attunement, the woman, I won't share the details of her experience because it was frankly disturbing. But they were placing their hands on her in ways that were uncomfortable for her, and that, quite frankly, were not even part of the system of Reiki. I was appalled to hear about this. But whether we are thinking that we're doing the right thing or not, we very well are not. Well, we always are not if we are placing our hands on another human being inappropriately. And so let's say, for instance, you're at a Reiki share and you are like, well, everyone here is a Reiki practitioner. That means they all know how this works, and I can just go ahead and stick my hands anywhere and everywhere because everyone knows how Reiki works and what this is and what the hand positions are. No, no, and no. You still do not have permission to put your hands anywhere you want to. And so please, I want to encourage us, I want to beg us to please always, always be explaining exactly where we might put our hands, to get permission to do so beforehand, and even to simply just not put your hands on people. We know that Reiki is still going to work, whether we have our hands on them or not. I mean, right? We have distance Reiki, and that works. And so when we have an in-person session, it doesn't mean that we need to put our hands on someone. Now, there are some clients who prefer touch. I personally had a massage therapist client who did prefer touch. She was touching people all day, every day, and she didn't mind touch. And so for me, there were particular areas of her body where she maybe wanted a little bit more attention, like, for instance, her ankle. And so I would put my hands on her ankle, knowing that that was okay, knowing that she actually preferred that, and that was fine by me as well. And so it's so very important for us to be incredibly mindful of where we are placing our hands, because let's not forget that any unwanted touch is technically assault. And so if we are putting our hands on clients and they don't want us to, technically that's against the law. Whether they've come into a Reiki session or knowing that they might be touched or not, it's important for us to be explaining everything and getting permission from the client for getting hands placed on them. Please, please, and please, even again, if you are with people who you feel know exactly what to expect and are already okay with it, no, they're not. Like I said, I'm a Reiki practitioner. We know that many Reiki practitioners touch people's faces. Yes, indeed, there are multiple hand positions for the face, but don't touch mine. Now, at the Reiki Business Summit, Michaela Daystar is going to talk to us all about these kinds of things. And so if you are thinking, oh my gosh, I am touching people, I am doing a bad thing, this is terrible. No. Take a step back. Michaela Daystar is here to help us with this at the Reiki Business Summit. She's talking to us about cultivating a trauma-informed practice, and of course, touch is a major component of having a trauma, or I should say, being aware of touch is a major component of having a trauma-informed Reiki practice. So make sure to join us in November, because Michaela Daystar is going to tell us all about it. Of course, there is so much more to say about in-person Reiki. And, the truth is that as we do more and more things online, in-person things can be more and more special in some ways. I know for me in my Reiki business that even though I do a lot of things online, I will say that the whole online business thing, just there are some really amazing perks about it. I still continue to have a portion of my business in person, just in order to keep me grounded and to give me some human contact, which I think is very powerful for us. And for some of our clients, it might be, one of the main ways that they just have access to another human being. I don't even mean in terms of physical touch, because remember, We don't even have to physically touch, but just that in-person connection. For instance, like how elderly people at the grocery store will often just strike up a conversation with you. I love to have those kinds of conversations because you might be the only person that they are talking to for the whole day. And I always enjoy those conversations, and I strike up conversations at the grocery store myself, particularly with the elderly. And so, for some of our clients, we might be one of their only few contacts during the day in terms of that in-person connection. And so I think it's something that that human connection is something that maybe we should consider not taking for granted. And for as powerful and wonderful as online things are, in some ways, there is just no replacing a being with someone in person and that kind of connection. So I'm sending lots of blessings and best wishes to that empowering and powerful and beautiful connection. And of course, sending lots of blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business. Do you offer in-person Reiki? What are your tips for in-person Reiki? Join us in the Reiki Business Collective and tell us all about it at facebook.com/groups/Reiki Biz. Sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business. Thanks for tuning in to the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, and send to a friend. Learn more about the Build Your Reiki Business program at standingstoneshealing.com/build. Sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business.